So before I start, I just want to lay down some ground rules. So Dukakis is going to be helping me moderate the discussion. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the chat, and I'll be answering them as I progress through the presentation. Right. So I'm pretty excited about this talk because this is where the training wheels come off. Right. So you've been spending all this time doing bubble sorting and converting decimals to bits and all that, but like this is the exciting part, right? You want to build websites and you want to deploy to the IC and you want to share your work with the entire world, right? So that's what we are going to learn in this particular lecture, right? So we'll just progress directly to the live example and we'll hope to the demo gods that everything goes well, right? Okay. So I have this pre-created repo that I'll be referencing, but I'll just do everything from scratch to show everybody how to do this by themselves. So what we'll do is we will create a brand new folder. Okay. So the way we are going to structure this talk is first we are going to create a new website. We are going to see how it works without any IC related things, and then we are going to add a backend to it so that we can see the website interacting with the IC. We'll deploy it locally, test locally, and then deploy the entire thing to the internet computer. Right. So the first thing that I want to do is to get my website, I will be using something called Vite.js. So Vite is it's a modern bundler. So if you've been working with the Motoko, like the DFX new command, basically what you've been using is something called Webpack. Excuse me. So Webpack is a fairly old bundler, but it is very stable. So a lot of toolchains prefer Webpack, but we are going to be using Vite. So Vite has a bunch of new features and things like hot module reloading that sort of speeds up the workflow. I'll also demonstrate how we use that. The prerequisites for this is you absolutely need to make sure that you have DFX installed, and you need to make sure you have the latest stable version of Node installed. So ensure that you have these two things available in your path. So to get started with Vite, it's actually pretty easy. We are going to copy paste this command. Another thing to notice, so mostly during this time, you've probably been doing front end with the DFX new command. If you've been doing front end with the DFX new command, you've been using the bare bones workflow, which includes just doing bare bones JavaScript. However, what we are really interested in and like I am very excited about is using the framework that I want to use, right? So I want to use Svelte, somebody else wants to use React, somebody else wants Vue. So we want to be able to do those things. So how do we do that? So for that, Vite actually has something called plugins built in, which we'll see in a moment. And that lets us choose which front-end framework we want to use from the get-go. So I'll just run this command. So if I see, I have this folder structure. Here I'll create a brand new folder with the Vite command. So I'll say npm create Vite latest. And yeah, I'll give it a name. I'll call it, let's say, counter for IC. So what this first asks me to do is, I'll just boost my font in case. It asks me whether I want a framework. So yes, I do want a framework. As you'll notice, it has all the popular frameworks built in, and there are more frameworks that you can even find plugins for on the Vite repository. However, these are the ones that come pre-baked. So I'm a huge fan of Svelte. I'll choose Svelte, but if some of you want to use React or Vue, you can. Okay. The next thing is, for now, I will skip TypeScript, but ideally when I'm building production applications, I choose TypeScript as well. So now that it says it is run, I see that a new folder has been created called counter on IC. So I will open a new code instance, which is running. So this particular folder has some things pre-built in. However, we just need to see that the scaffolding was done and I can run this app. So what I will do is, first thing I need to do is I need to run npm install, which will fetch the packages listed in my package JSON and just let me start my dev server. one thing that I really like about Svelte is it is very lightweight. So you'll notice there's hardly any dependencies at all. There's like two dependencies, where as like if you're using something like React, it probably downloads the entire npm module. Sure. So jokes aside, I'll go ahead and start my dev server. So if I run npm run dev, you'll notice it started up instantly again. So this is one of the advantages of using Vite. It uses something called ESBuild under the covers to have your builds run blazing fast. And if I'm doing JavaScript, I want things to be blazing fast. Anything slower than that won't do for me. So I will open this, and if I open this, I can see it just gives me a sort of starter Svelte app which has a counter. So I can click on this, and I'll notice that it basically returns my clicks. However, the problem is this is basically a completely front-end app, right? It is not talking to any API, or this data is not persisted anywhere. So if I refresh the page, it goes away. So, but I would want to persist this data ideally on some kind of a backend. And since we are working with the IC, obviously we want to persist this on the IC, right? So the next step would be, so how do I save this data to a backend? Basically, save this data to the IC blockchain. I opened my network tab just to show you that I don't have any shenanigans going on. So basically, when I do this click, no network requests are being made. So this is basically just persisting this to the, like this is just updating on the front end. There's no persistence happening. Okay. So what is the next step? So for the next step, basically what we need to do is add DFX to my project. So what we've already been doing, we'll add a DFX JSON file over here. Again, we don't need any sort of starter template, anything. I'll demonstrate how you build that up for yourself from the ground up, so that no matter what front end you're using, you should easily be able to connect your front end to the IC. In DFX JSON, I don't need a lot of things. I'll just copy paste from this particular project, but I'll explain as I go. So basically, what I'm saying is, I have a backend canister that I want to create. We are already familiar with this. So basically, we will have a folder over here called canisters, which will have a backend folder, inside which there will be a main Motoko file. Okay. We will also make the Motoko plugin work in a second. Okay. The other thing that I want to mention is I want to also have a front-end canister. And in the front-end canister, what I'm specifying is the entry point should be index.html, and this is available in the dist folder. So when I build my project in a while, we will see that there will be a dist folder created, and this particular front-end canister is a asset canister that I'm specifying as the type here. And inside it, there will be an index.html, which is the entry point for my front-end canister. So I can also show that quickly. So in a new terminal, if I just run npm run build, you notice again, it is blazing fast. So it built this folder called dist, and inside dist, there is an index.html, and basically it went through the entire process of doing all the transpilations and the converting Svelte into bare bones JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and ultimately created this this folder of assets that I can directly upload to the IC. So this dist is what is being referenced over here. Okay. The next part is, again, since I'm not using any build tool for my Motoko, I can keep this blank, but essentially if you were using something like Vessel, you would specify that over. In the networks, I want to specify this. So there are two kinds of networks that I'll be working with. Currently, the local network that I'll be working with, which is what runs when I run DFX start, that will bind to this particular address, localhost 8000. And on the IC, I will basically be deploying. And this is just metadata for the. So I will just save this. If I do DFX start, my IC replica has started up. I can see that I'm listening on localhost 8000. Okay. So the next step is to change my front end slightly. So what I can do is, I'll just briefly also explain what the front end code looks like. So it's pretty simple. The main entry point for my Svelte app looks like this. It basically has some hello world with an image, and there's a counter component. I'll show the counter component as well, and then there's some text, and here in the style, basically they've just given us some style so that it looks good and looks nice. And that is what we see in the front end over here. Right? And this particular clicks, this is a separate counter component. You can just go to that counter component and check. So again, it basically sets up a variable called count 0. It has a function called increment, and inside a button there is some text which references the count variable. So this is the 0 that we see over here, and then on click it just runs this increment, which increments the count by 1. And then there's some style which sort of gives it that nice color and makes it round and background. Okay. So the next thing that I want to do is, I want to add some code to my backend canister. Before I proceed, I just want to check if somebody has any questions till now. Are there any questions?
Yes, just one.
Okay. So Angular will probably have something. If you go over here in Vite, there's something called using plugins. And in finding plugins, one second. In the plugins list, you will find. So there are official plugins, and then there are community plugins. So if you go to community plugins, there's a huge list of plugins. So here I believe you should be able to find Angular. Okay, they don't have Angular support. But the rest of the modern frameworks you should easily find. And somebody asked to enlarge the text. Is the text not visible right now? I can enlarge it further, but if this is visible, we can proceed. Okay. So the next thing that I want to do is, since I have added my canister and added a main Motoko, you might have noticed that it was not able to find the DFX file. So hence it said that it doesn't know what to do with this Motoko file. We'll just restart the language service and choose back. Okay. So now this time Motoko language server was initialized. Okay. So what I want to do is, basically I'm trying to build a backend that will have essentially two things. It will let me retrieve the current counter value, and it should also let me increment the counter value. Again, ignore GitHub Copilot, it is very active. It wants to give me all this code. But yeah, so for this, I'm just going to copy paste some very simple code, but I'll explain what I'm doing. So over here, I just have a simple actor, and I have a counter of type nat, which I'm initializing to 0. I'm setting it to a stable variable. The reason I do this is because so that across upgrades, this value is not lost. So if you can imagine, somebody has been pressing counter and it has reached 100. And if this were not stable, the next time I upgrade the canister, this value would be lost. Okay. Then I have a simple function. This is a query function notice, because again, I don't really care about the security of this counter. So it's okay to just have this as a query function. Inside it, I'm also debug printing it to the network log, and I'm just returning the value of the counter that I'm storing over here. And the other function that I have is increment value, where I'm just incrementing the value of the counter by 1 and returning the value. Okay. So now if I go back to my terminal, and ideally the way I and backend canisters is I front end every time I make a change. The reason for for this is very simple. I'll actually show you. So this is where one of Weed's other functions comes into play, which is hot module reloading. So with something like Webpack, what happens is every time you do a save, it needs to recompile the entire thing and then sort of go through the entire build process. With Vite, when you're doing like when you're running in dev mode, essentially it uses something called ES modules to speed up that process. So essentially, if I can show you, again, I cannot, like I don't have enough good things to say about it. So over here, instead of, like if you notice, I'll just change this to some other text. And notice on the left, the moment I hit save, it immediately updated, right? There was no transpilation step. There was nothing that needed to happen. And this blazing fast response feedback is something I just want to keep. I don't want to have to deploy my front-end canister every time I make a simple text change and then have to wait for all the, like the entire DFX build process to go through and then I can again refresh. I don't want to do that, right? So to retain this, the way I actually work with my front end and back end is I run my front end side server outside of the DFX stack. So basically, this front end server is being managed by Vite itself. I will only deploy the backend canister to the IC and then I talk to the backend canister from my front end canister. We will also see how to do that. But essentially, if I go back here, my DFX is running. So if I say DFX deploy backend, so notice I'm just deploying the backend canister. I'm not deploying the front end canister. And once I run this, this will basically hit this DFX folder. It is deploying the canister and it will just finish. So every time I make a change to my Motoko code, I need to do this redeploy. So ideally, if I were also doing this on front end, this would become a very long feedback loop. And again, I want things to be as fast as possible. Right. So once this is deployed, there's one more thing that I want to do, which is there is a command called dfx generate, which will generate the actor bindings for your front end. So basically, we can directly consume the actor bindings from the front end. I'll just show you. So essentially, if you notice, SRC right now has the assets folder and the lib folder. It doesn't have anything else inside. But once I run dfx generate, you will notice there's a declarations folder that it automatically generates. Oh, my bad. Generate. Once I did this, you notice this declarations folder came up. And basically what this does is, inside the DFX, when it is running, it already created all these files. So it just copies those same folders, those same files from over here, the TS file, the JS file and all, apart from the WASM and these things, into my declarations folder. And ideally, the way you work is you want to commit these things to your source code. So basically, when you're like saving this code to a commit and deploying to GitHub, you want to include these files. You don't include your DFX folder. Hence, if we were not putting it over here, these would essentially need to get regenerated every time. But ideally, it's a good idea since you're using this in your front end code to keep this as part of your commit log. So over here, if I just show you what happened. So corresponding to this actor, you will notice the did file is basically, it's like a contract for your service. So you'll notice we have two functions that were generated, get current value and increment value corresponding to the actor over here. And if I look at my index.js, basically all this was automatically generated for me. So I'll explain what this code is doing also. So it will import something. So we will have to add this to our front end. I'll just do that, but I'll explain what is happening. It is importing from the Definity agent JS package. It is importing the contracts from over here. It is creating this method called create actor, where canister ID and some options can be passed. And then the create actor with the canister ID from my backend is being exported as a variable that I can just use in my code again. So it is not doing any magic. Basically, what it is doing is it is doing two things. First, for the agent, there's something called root key that needs to be fetched, but you don't need to do this on production. Essentially, you just need to do this on your local dev environment. So that is what it is doing. It is checking that if my process and node and value has been set to production. If it is not production, then fetch the root key. Otherwise, it is automatically handled for you on the main. And then it just creates this actor that you can just consume in your front end code. So these canister ID and these values have to be set in the front end. Okay. The next thing that we need to do is we need to install some. So essentially my backend is now ready to be consumed by my front end. Right now what we need to do is install some packages for our front end to consume this, and we need to configure our config.js so that we are able to consume the backend actor in our front end. Okay. Are there any questions till now? Perfect. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. So the next step is, So the next step is we need to import some packages into our front end. So to do that, what I will do is I will show you the list of packages. Yeah. Definity agent is one package, and buffer is another package that we need to install. I'll just install them and then I'll explain what I'm doing. So npm I -d. -d stands for adding them as a dev dependency instead of a prod dependency. Ideally, in this case, it won't matter because everything gets built by Vite into a blob that you can just upload. But ideally, I like having my unless it's a specific reason for a prod dependency, I want to put it as a dev dependency. So Definity agent is the first one, and then buffer is the So once this gets installed, you will notice that I was getting some errors over here. Sorry, not this. In the index.js, which will go away because this was not. This is like the package manager is able to find these modules now. They have been added to my node modules for. Okay. So now that this is installed, the next step to do is, so you'll notice we have these process ends being specified. But if I try to console log them right now, I would get them as undefined. So what I need to do is I need to configure my Vite config to know what these values are. Again, I'll just copy paste some code and then I'll also explain what I'm doing. And like this is the magic sauce. This is how you actually are able to use any bundler to integrate with BFX for your front end. So if you want, I can actually compare and even show you like this is basically the same steps that the default boilerplate also does, but it does it in Webpack's language. So Webpack has a config file, and inside Webpack's config file, it exactly does the same thing. So you can do it in Vite. You can, if you have some other, there's one called Snowpack. You can do it anywhere else. You just need to know how to translate this code into your current bundler's language. Okay. I'll just explain what has been done over here. So the first thing is I am importing Svelte as a plugin for Vite, so that essentially Vite knows how to convert these .svelte files into HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Inside my code, I am checking if currently I am running in dev mode or in build mode. Essentially, when I'm right now, I am running in dev mode so that I can get this hot module refresh and fast reloads and things. But if I'm deploying to the IC, I would need to run it in build. So then I'm just getting my canister IDs by using this FS module from Node.js. Again, this is very simple and boilerplate code. If you don't understand, you can just look this up online as well. So I'm just reading the file depending on whether I'm running on dev mode or production mode. So if I'm running in dev mode, my canister IDs is in this folder, right? My local, like the backend and everything is listed over here. So I'm just getting it in dev mode. I'll have it here. When I'm deploying to the IC, there will be another file created on the root level called canister IDs. I'm reading that file, and I'm turning that into a JavaScript object. I am iterating over the entries in that particular canister IDs to create a, basically it will look like process n canister ID underscore canister ID, and this is something that this particular actor needs over here so that it can replace this values when it is creating your actor. If you don't have this, you will see a lot of errors. So basically, since I have only one canister called backend, it will create a backend canister ID and replace the value when it is building this. So this expects backend canister ID. So hence I need to inject that using Vite over here. So this will create a process and backend canister ID. And depending whether it is running on dev mode or production mode, it will get the value from .dfx folder or canister IDs.json, which will be there in the root folder. Again, as we deploy this, you'll see this for yourself. Okay. The next thing is I'm just parsing the dfx JSON file that I've declared here. Again, same thing. And I'm getting the port that this is going to be deployed on. So in my dfx JSON file, if I can just show you, there is a address that I'm deploying to, and from that address, I'm just extracting this out so that I know which port my network, my local replica network is running. And then I'm defining all the config for Vite to build my project. So essentially, I'm saying, I'm setting my process and node. Again, you notice this is being referenced over here. In the code that was generated by DFX, I have this process env node. Right? So I need to substitute this value during build time. So hence I'm checking if it is in dev mode, it will set that as development. Otherwise, it will set it as production. You can forget this for now. I'm not using Pin. It's okay. I'm using the Svelte plugin. This will become more apparent as I'm doing it. But basically, what I'm doing is I'm setting up a shorthand so that I can directly refer to $canisters instead of having to specify the entire path in my JavaScript code. This will become clear as I code this. And I'm also setting my server to proxy all calls to /API to my DFX local replica. So essentially, when you're making calls to the Dfinity agent on mainnet, this is already done for you. On mainnet, your front-end calls are routed to the /API endpoint. So for you to do that on your local as well, you need to set this. And I'm just saying the target for my front-end build is basically ES 2020, which means browsers that have come out in 2020 or after. But this is basically the entire explanation. So you can actually even check this. So if I do dfx new, when you do this dfx new and the project that it generates, you will notice that it also has a webpack config file. So for that webpack config file, it basically does these exact same steps, but it looks a bit complicated initially when you see it for the first time. So once this finishes, I can just show you. So this is one of the other reasons that I like Vite more. You notice how quick Vite was as compared to this. Okay. So if I do some project, this is the default boilerplate generated by Dfinity for you. So you see that webpack config.js, it basically does that exact same thing that I showed you in my Vite config. You notice all this, it is basically creating the same thing. It is getting local canister, prod canister, setting the network, creating those entries with underscore canister ID. Over here it is setting the proxy API. But yeah, again, this feels more verbose to me as well, but sure. Right? We just did the exact same thing for Vite. Okay. Are there any questions till now? What happens to the npm dfx start? I had run npm run dev. It is still running. So that is just running my dev server for my front end. If you see, this is what I had run initially, npm run dev. This is still running. So every time I make a change, the front end running locally just gets updated. So this is still running. I can still interact with it. Right now, what I did was first I set up my front end. I'm using Vite to set up my front end, and Svelte is the templating language that I want to write my front end. Right. So that was the first thing that I did. The second thing that I did was, now I want to connect this front end to a IC backend that will also run locally. So how do I do it? First, I set up a canister, gave it two and gave it two functions, so that the things that I was doing on the front end, which was showing the counter value and incrementing the counter value, I can actually do directly with the IC instead of just doing it in the front end. Okay. Now, how do I consume this on my front end? So I had to install two packages. I had to generate these files. Specifically, this index.js is the important one. Using dfx generate, I deployed my canister backend to the local replica, and then I just configured Vite to ensure that my front end can now consume this index.js file. That's all I did. Ask me if something else is unclear. Is there a way to use only the backend canister on the IC and connect the front end from a different web to server? It absolutely is possible, and a lot of people actually do it. So sometimes you will notice that a lot of people have like pretty URLs connected to the IC backend. Basically, you're like having a proper domain name instead of the .ic0.app thing. So some people use some clever workarounds, but a lot of times you will also notice that people have deployed their front end to the normal Web2 world, and they're connecting to the IC backend using the agent.js. So basically, we imported this npm agent. That is all you need. This one. We imported this definity agent. This is basically what allows your front end to talk to the backend through the actor that was generated over here. Right? Sure. Let's proceed. There's one other thing that we need to do, but this is sort of a limitation for now. I believe this should get resolved sometime in the future. So in our index HTML, there's this one other thing that we need to add. The script module import buffer. The reason we need to do this is basically on the IC mainnet, this is automatically added to your front end's window object. But for us to run locally, we need to add this. So if I just go back to my example, I'll close all this. In my index HTML, right after the app, I will just add this. Okay. So now that this is added, basically in my front end, you'll notice my front end is still running over here. Right? It still isn't talking to the IC. That is what will make it do. But one more thing that I just want to show is my backend is deployed right now. So if I go to my candid UI, and enter my backend's ID, I will notice that the two functions that I created, they are available. So if I query for current value, it is 0. If I increment, it is incrementing, right? So my backend running locally is ready. All I need to do right now is connect this front end so that it is talking to this canister. If I query, I can see that. And you'll notice the queries are blazing fast again. But since this is a call that needs to go through consensus, it is an update call. It takes some time. Okay. So now that my backend is ready and I have set up my build system, first thing that I need to do, I'll just stop my dev server and start it again. So that will ensure that the changes that I made to my Vite config was picked up by Vite. Okay. The next thing that I'll do is, if you notice in my counter example, I don't like how prettier is formatting this one second. I will just get rid of the it's okay. So I'll just collapse this so that you can see. Okay. So over here, this particular thing is talking to just the front end code. So what I want to do is, Svelte has this thing called on mount. If you have ever programmed React, it is very similar. So basically on mount runs every time the component loads. So in my on mount, what I want to do is, I will import the backend canister that I showed earlier. So this particular file in my SRC index.js, I want to import this so that I can call this. Now the thing is, if I had to import it the regular way, I would have to do // and then see, okay, declarations and all that. I don't like doing all that. So hence, in my weed config.js, I had set up an alias. So I just want to say $canisters and it will resort to this one. So later on, if I move that folder, I just need to update it in one. So I'll say $canisters / and I think I called it backend. And over here, I will import. So index I also have to say. So if I say /index, let me just console log this. And maybe we start by web server. Perfect. So I can see that the backend canister was imported and it has these two functions, the get current value and the increment value. So now in my code, what I can do is, I can say count equal to backend. So okay, let us do something. I'll get rid of this. In my code over here, I'll say, I'll make this an async function because these calls return a promise. Again, GitHub Copilot being very eager, but yeah, we will just do await backend dot get. It was my get current value. It returns a type of begin. So another thing I need to do is, I need to set this as a type of begin. For now, I'll get rid of this. Get current value, and I will set count to this. If I save this now, you'll notice that it is fetching the value from my local replica. It is showing 3. The next thing that we need to do is, we'll just add the increment as well. So again, this is just basic front end. If you don't understand something, again, ask me. So on click, I'll have another async function, which will I think I am calling it increment only, right? Not this. Yes, I'm calling it incrementing well, increment well. So I will set count equal to await backend increment well. Right. So now what this is going to do is, this is going to talk to the IC replica. So if I now press this is actually making a call to my local network. I'll show that as well. Notice when I click this made a call, and then it is reading state and sending it back. If I close this and reopen this back again, you notice this value is persistent, right? So this is reading from my local replica and giving the value back. Okay. If you have any questions, please ask me. Okay, I don't see any questions. I'm going to assume everybody is following. Perfect. So now that this is working, the next step is to deploy this to the IC mainnet. So I will stop all these processes. So to deploy to the IC mainnet, the first thing that we need to do is, I'm going to expand this. We need to first see that we have the correct identity and wallet configured. So first I'm going to say, who am I? And it says default again. So DFX, you can go to smartcontracts.org. Go to the documentation, and if you search for DFX, it lists all the possible sub commands that it has, right? And this is very handy. If you want to work with DFX, I would absolutely implore you to get used to using these commands because they will help you. Okay. So the first thing that we want to do is with identity, we want to make sure that we have cycles in our wallet. Again, I have already gone ahead and converted some ICP to cycles, but if you're struggling with that, in the network deployment tutorial, they go over this. It's pretty straightforward. You basically need to get your principal, corresponding to your principal, you need have an account ID. So basically, in the account ID, you can hold ICP. So in this particular example, they're holding 10 ICP in their account ID, and they just convert that to convert the amount to cycles using the create canister. So what they're saying is convert 0.25 ICP for this particular principal and create a canister. So this just creates a canister for them with this ID. Again, notice that this is a blank canister. So the next thing that they do is they deploy the WASM wallet to this particular canister and get the balance, which gives them 0.25 ICP, whatever that conversion was, it gives them that. So I've already done this for myself. So essentially I have a wallet with some balance. I can show that to you as well. So if I do DFX wallet, so I don't remember all of these, but you can easily check them off. So if you go to DFX identity, no, wait, it was identity, DFX wallet, network IC balance. So this is what I need to know. So if I run this, I will see I already have this. Some cycles converted. So next step for me to do is we need to deploy. So we have till now we have been running this command called dfx deploy. However, dfx deploy does three things under the covers. It first goes to the IC mainnet and it reserves a canister ID for you. So this dfx canister create, this will basically reserve a canister ID for you and allocate some cycles to it. If you don't specify how many cycles to allocate to it, it will basically allocate, I think 4 trillion was what it was doing last time I checked. That might have changed now, but it will basically put some default amount of cycles in the canister that it creates. And I think around 1 trillion is burned cycles for the canister creation process. The next step that it does is it runs dfx build. So basically what dfx build does is it will take your dfx JSON, sorry, not this. It will take your dfx JSON file. It will check what canisters are listed here, and it will build them into WASM blobs that can be uploaded to the IC. And the third step that it does is it takes those WASM blocks and it deploys them to the canister that was reserved for you in this step. Okay. So we'll do them one by one just to see how this works. The first thing that I'll do is DFX canister create all. The other thing to note is when you do this, it will run on your local replica, so you need to specify network IC. So over here, I'll say it's canister. So this IDs were reserved for me on the IC mainnet. Basically, they are right now blank canisters, but it would have topped them up with some cycle so that I can do the deployments. The other thing to notice is it automatically generated this canister IDs JSON file that I was telling you about. And on the IC, these are the canister IDs for what I want to deploy to. So I can even check that. So let's see. For the backend, this is the ID, right? So I can do DFX, canister, network, IC, status, and then my ID. If I run this, okay, I think I need to deploy a version before I can do anything. So that's okay. So the next step that I want to do is do the DFX build. I can run DFX build. DFX build. You know what? We'll just run DFX deploy. This seems to be some thing that I'm missing over here, but it's okay. We can just run DFX deploy network. So basically, again, it will do the same thing. The canisters were already created in the previous step. This canister gets rejected the message. This is some error that we've been seeing since the last update. So apparently you need to specify no wallet on all these things, I guess. Let's see. If some dev mentors on the chat have any suggestions, I'm happy to try. Is Seb on the call? Oh. This particular error. Okay. One other thing that we can try is ideally this should have deployed automatically. Okay, you know what? This is part of live demos, but that's okay. I feel like I'm missing something very simple. Let's check something else. So, let's do something. I'll replace this canister IDs and we'll just do a simple DFX. So I will cut this. And we'll do DFX deploy. So the thing is, since the last update from 0.84 to 0.92, there have been some changes, breaking changes made to how controllers get added to system and how the DFX deploy command works. So since then, like there have been some problems that we are seeing. I'm probably missing something very simple. For some reason, I'm not able to deploy. That's okay. I think I can troubleshoot this, and maybe after this call, I will give out the rest of the steps and show you how, like, what is the link that was deployed to the IC. But I think if there are any questions up till this point, I can take them. But I would have really liked to have shown you the deployed version on the IC. So this particular command would be helpful if you were converting the ICP tokens and adding them to the canister. But the thing is, I already have done this so that I have a wallet canister with the requested amount of cycles, with the requisite amount of cycles. So if I run this, you notice I have a bunch of cycles. I have around 275 trillion cycles available. So I don't think the cycles is the problem. It's just that there's something that's changed with the DFX developer that I'm just not seeing right. Maybe I can just troubleshoot this offline and then give all of you the links and the flow that I did to set this up. Are there any other questions? But this is running absolutely fine locally, and there might be just a simple step that I'm missing, due to which this is currently not getting deployed. I can maybe just troubleshoot this offline and give everybody the link. Dugakesh, do we have any other questions?
Let me see. If you have questions, guys, just raise your hand.
But the rest of the process, like if you have any other questions, please ask me. This is just one simple step that is not working at this moment. There's some additional flag that I probably need to pass. So once we do that, this same thing that we were seeing running locally, it would also get deployed to the IC. Everything else remains the same.
It seems that there are no more questions. We have no more questions, Saikat.
Sure. So I'll just take a couple of minutes. I'll troubleshoot this, and on the Discord, I'll just give out the exact step of commands that I followed to deploy this to the IC.
Okay, so you want me to leave the recording on?
No, I think it's best if we just close this recording, and it will just be like 2 or 3 steps that I additionally need to figure out. I just don't want people to sit through all those minutes of pointless troubleshooting.
Okay, so you want me to end the session, or you're gonna let them know through Discord?
That's right. So once I just have those commands, I'll post those commands and then share how I did it.
Okay,
but if
perfect.
people want to sit around, they can. It's just that I believe we have run out of time for this particular session, so they might want to prepare for other sessions or work on other things. If somebody wants to stick around, I'm happy to showcase my debugging workflow, like what I'm doing to get this to work.
Okay, how long do you think it would take?
I will probably look at the definitive forums to see if somebody else has also run into this, and I'll probably also ask if somebody else has run into this on the dev Discord. And then I'll just carefully retrace my steps to see what exactly I'm missing.
Okay, I'm gonna end the session then.
But if
once you figure it
don't
out,
expect this to last more than 30 hours or so.
Yeah, so I'm gonna end the session.
30 minutes or so.
And once you figure it out, then share it with them through Discord.
That's right.
Okay, perfect. Bye, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.